Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Today I want to tell you what happened when I did the transition pictures for Jimmy Swaggart, the Pentecostal preacher who died at the age of 90 on the 1st of July 2025 of cardiac arrest. This was a very, very influential man in his time. He started out, I think, as a gospel singer. He was the cousin of Jerry Lee Lewis, the great Balls of Fire guy. He was also a very, very good pianist, apparently. But about 1955, he had some kind of epiphany, and he started preaching. From those humble beginnings, he went into radio and then onto television and ultimately became a global phenomenon, making about $150 million a year with Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. They had a college and various other things as well, Sun Life Broadcasting. And he became one of the most influential televangelists of his time. But then in the 1980s, when he was at the height of his powers, really, catastrophe struck. He was a member of a global Pentecostal organization called the Assemblies of God, as was another preacher called Marvin Gorman. Jimmy Swaggart accused Marvin Gorman of committing adultery, for which I believe he was defrocked from the Assemblies of God. I think he also sued Jimmy Swaggart for defamation at some point and won. But he went one further than that. He set a private detective on Jimmy Swaggart. And in 1988, this private detective found Jimmy Swaggart in a motel with a prostitute.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
From there, things unraveled, and many people came forward and said that Jimmy Swaggart had an obsession with Penthouse magazine, and it destroyed his career. He was defrocked for that, actually, and went on TV. You may have seen the images because it's pretty iconic by now. He wept, he apologized. That was very much his style, the fire and brimstone style of yelling and running around and speaking in tongues and sobbing. Very, very melodramatic. And that probably would have been the end of it. His followers kept on following him despite the scandal. Unfortunately, in 1991, I think he was caught again with another prostitute. He clearly had a problem. I don't care what anybody else does, but obviously the hypocrisy back then was considerable. Ironically, he also attacked Jim Bakker and revealed that he was having an affair. Jim Bakker, another preacher, and called him a cancer on the body of Christ. That was the kind of guy that Jimmy Swaggart was. And as I said, he made quite a reputation for himself. But he died on July the 1st of a heart attack at the age of 90. And I thought, because so many people asked, I would take a look at his crossover. But the weird thing is that the more I went on with this crossover, the more revealing it became and the more emotional it became. And before I knew it, I'd gone through the whole process, which of course presents a moral dilemma for me because I don't normally give the transition pictures out for people so soon after they die. It's a rule I have. I made it up. It's not any kind of hard and fast rule, but it's done out of deference to their loved ones, usually. But on this particular occasion, because he was such a massive global figure in his time, and because the pictures are so interesting, I am going to tell them to you. Be warned, though, there is a little part of this that is a bit rough. And if you're squeamish or you have a very, very vivid imagination, then maybe you want to shut your eyes at that point, and I'll try and make it easy for you. But other than that, it's very, very touching and very, very interesting. When I went into his energy, he was hanging from a strap with a sheer drop below him that he was quite afraid of. I don't think it's about, will I go to hell or whatever. I mean, that may have been part of it, but it seemed to be this last-minute trepidation about what does lie beyond the veil. What does come next? It's very hard to judge a man for thinking that. I'm pretty sure that all of us in our final moments have those thoughts. Where am I going? Is what I've said about the afterlife true? Will God be waiting for me there? That's the kind of thing he was thinking. Now, I know that he had his heart attack and then he died about 10 days later, I think. So that would account for hanging by the strap. And he really didn't want to go, actually, despite being 90 years old. He was very resistant to going. Maybe somebody like that does genuinely fear going to hell. There is no hell, as it turns out. It's all made up. It's a human construct. But I can understand that somebody who's preached that throughout their entire career would fear such a thing. But he couldn't hold on for much longer, and finally he let go. But it's rather like people who are on a water slide, and they start off at the top in the wrong position, and they go all the way down in different awkward positions because they weren't in a good place at the beginning. It was like that. He just fell because he wouldn't surrender. And he tumbled and tumbled. This is all metaphorical, by the way. But he tumbled and tumbled down this shaft and landed in what almost felt like a huge bed of cotton wool. It was a very soft landing. And he felt relieved. All that panic, all that hanging on, he didn't need to do that. It was a waste of energy. And he had this surge of self-assurance at this point. Oh, right. That wasn't as bad as I thought. Bearing in mind, he's only in the crossover stage. He hasn't actually passed on yet at this point. But I think he thought that somebody was going to come and get him. This must be built into his narrative, that somebody comes and greets you. Somebody comes and helps you the rest of the way. And nobody did, because nobody does. Really, you have to go through this process alone. It's a singular soul journey. And he had to stand up and wade through this cotton wool, let's just say, symbolically. But it finally brought him into that cave that I always see, a metaphorical cave where people end up, and it is the interface between being in form and being formless. At that point, they have died. But he had the same kind of bewilderment and lost little lamb feel to him of somebody who expected one thing and got another. It didn't match the story he'd been told, or the stories he'd been telling hundreds of millions of people for decades. This was a different narrative that he was living out. And at first he really didn't know how to respond to it. There was a feeling of, so, okay, where is he? There's a common misunderstanding, actually, that we as people simply walk through this process, meet Jesus or God or whatever, and go, and ascend to heaven or whatever. But, of course, God is not a person or a being. It's a universal, infinite field of consciousness. And so you go from the low-frequency, 3D carbon-based life form that you were to merging with this greater consciousness. It's combining your individual consciousness with universal consciousness. It's a merger. It's not about the human being walking through a series of steps and then disappearing up to heaven. It doesn't work that way. But I think he thought it was going to be like that. So he was completely confused to begin with. And then I felt relief. He may, being the kind of person he was, have tortured himself for decades about what kind of punishment might await him after he died. Now he was here, he realized that there was no punishment, no judgment, no fire, no brimstone, just peace and quiet and harmony. Hence the relief. It's about releasing the soul from its human constrictions. That's what this process is about, and he felt it very strongly now. He approached the tunnel that I always see. This is a kind of umbilical passageway between the arrival and when they ascend, and he began to climb it. That's where I was going to leave it. That was his crossover. That was enough. But just as I was about to let this go, I saw up ahead something that completely intrigued me that I've never seen before. Now, I warned you that there's something a little rough in the middle of these pictures, and this is it. It's very quick, but if you want to close your eyes, this will be a good time to do it. Because as he went up the tunnel, he couldn't move forward after a while because the space was filled with two revolving metal drums, metaphorically speaking, like you get in those old-fashioned paper shredders, where you put the papers in and two sets of teeth inside mangle the papers. The problem was that there was no way past this except through. And in the pictures, he stepped into it. And of course, the next thing that happened was he got caught up in the teeth and he went through it and vanished. And that was that. I couldn't find him after that. I carried on up the tunnel and it was a dead end. There was no light. I normally see a light like a dome there. It just ended. And then I thought, well, where did he go? What happened to him after he went through that revolving mangle shredder thing? So I went below it, and there was like a passageway underneath, parallel to the one above. And this husk of his old self was still caught in it. It was just hanging there. There was no spirit or soul to it. It was a completely lifeless shell. It didn't move. Then, as I looked around, I saw a little figure walking away up this tunnel, like a child that's running away from home. This was him. This was the real him. The tunnel was really big, and he was really small. And that usually suggests that the person is finding out that they weren't as great as their ego told them they were on the mortal side. That was all a facade. What his ego had invested its energy in while he was in form. But now he was facing his own vulnerability, his authenticity. This was what was left when everything else was taken away. It was rather like buying a cream cake. I'm finding out that 5% is cake and 95% is cream. He spent his life trying to get to heaven, trying to win God's favor, trying to score brownie points and do the right thing. And obviously, being a sinner, he fell short. That's what sin is. You fall short of your best. And now realized that all he had to do was none of that. Was just be joyful, be loving, serve people, be forgiving and merciful, and so on. Everything else is just ego stuff, as he discovered here. They do say that the opposite of fear is faith. But in actual fact, that's not true. The opposite of faith is faith. It's faith with a capital F versus faith with a little f. If you invest your energy in a faith, a religion, and all its doctrine and beliefs and so on, you do so because of fear. You fear what will happen if you don't belong to that and don't follow the rules and are disobedient to God's order. Whereas if you have faith, you understand that your power is within. God speaks to you within. That is where your true strength and sovereignty lie. That's your connection to God, not anything on the outside. No ministries or Bibles or whatever else it is. Faith with a little f is true empowerment. Faith with a big F, while it can bring community and support and friends and a lot of really good stuff, actually. But faith with a capital F is based on fear of what will happen if you don't follow the rules, if you don't believe. And again, this is what he found out now. And he really had to sit with this. In a metaphorical way, he sat down on a little rock he found and really pondered it. Ahead of him now was the light. He was in the right place. And honestly, this is the bit that really got to me about him. For the very first time, I thought he seemed like he was vulnerable enough to really know God. In other words, to be at one with the energy of the divine. And I've really felt that so strongly. This was a magical moment for him. He'd been through all the realizations and all the shedding and all the discoveries about what he didn't need to attach his energy to. And having been through all of that, here he was, his true soul self, ready to ascend and not meet God, but be one with the divine. And he stood up in the pictures and merged. It was not even a stepping thing like some people do. He simply merged into the light because he could. He got what he'd always wanted. He just didn't get it in the way he thought he would. And I firmly believe that some people do get that in life. They don't wait that long. And we can all have that. It really is about letting go. It's such a cliche, but it really is about letting go. About daring to surrender to your essence, your connection to Source. That poor guy, he could have had it all while he was alive. Instead, he got caught up in the religious thing and so on. But it was all there for the taking. And in the end, he took it. He got it. And he merged with universal consciousness. It was a joy to watch. And that's what I learned from Jimmy Swaggart. Alrighty, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.